September hits and you're torn. Part of you is ready for crisp mornings and cozy routines, but a part of you wonders if your garden is already done. Should you even think about planting more, or should you just give up until spring? Now, if you're a regular here, you probably already know my answer. And if you're new, welcome. My goal with every episode is to help make growing your own food exciting, doable, and enjoyable. If that's your desire, you are in the right place. While I'll always encourage you to enjoy the rewards of growing your own food, I'm also a realist, and I know that we all have lives besides our gardens. By September, most of us are ready for fall. Cozy mornings, cooler air, football, pumpkin-flavored everything, and the promise of change. But when it comes to the garden, that shift can leave us feeling very uncertain. Is it too late to plant? Will anything actually grow before the winter sets in? Do I even want to try, or just button it all up and put it away until spring? This uncertainty can often stop us from doing anything at all in our gardens. But here, I want you to hear me. You can still plant more than you think with just a fraction of the effort that the spring garden commands, and you'll be thanking yourself in a month or two that you took the time to plant. But what can you plant? What is it not too late to plant? Because some things are too late to plant. Well, today I'm going to walk you through exactly which crops to sow or transplant right now for fresh harvests in the weeks ahead. Plus, there's one piece of gardening advice that works fantastic in the spring and in the summer, but actually can work against you in the fall, and we'll dig into that at the very end today. By the end of this episode, you'll know how to keep your garden producing, even as the days get shorter. Now, today we're going to be diving into 4 different categories of crops that you can still grow now in September. We're going to be talking about greens, root crops, brassicas, and herbs. So first, let's talk about my favorite. I talked about this a little bit last week, and that is greens, and specifically some fast greens that are going to come to maturity quickly. The first one is going to be lettuce. Now, this time of year, you can direct sow lettuce seeds in your garden, or you can transplant them if you buy them from the garden center. In my area, I can still start them indoors because they take about 4 weeks to get to where I can plant them out. So if I'm starting them indoors in the middle of September, I can get them out in the middle of October. They will be okay with a light frost, and I have floating row covers, so they should be fine. I like to transplant them when they're about 3 to 4 inches tall. To me, that's about the sweet spot for transplanting lettuce. The key with lettuce, though, if you want to get them harvestable before the winter sets in, is you really want to prioritize the fast-growing lettuce types. The best ones are going to be your loose leaf lettuces because they're going to grow fast with a days to maturity of about 30 to 40 days. That's 4 to 6 weeks, and you could have good sized lettuces, especially if you directly sow them in the garden. The next would be butterhead or bib type lettuces. They're about 40 to 50 days to maturity, so a little bit longer. Romaine are longer than that, 55 to 65. Personally, I usually don't plant romaines this late in the season just because I don't think they're going to have time to mature before the daylight gets too low and it gets too cold. And then crisp heads, which are icebergs, if you grow those in the fall, they really needed to have been started before now. And I'm talking in general about most of us who are probably in zone 7, 8 or so. If you're in the south, you could probably still do crisp head lettuces, no problem. But for those of us who still have, 6 weeks or so, 4 to 6 weeks before our first frost, I would probably avoid the crisp head lettuce, and these other ones will do a lot better. Another option is to plant a mesclun mix. This is a variety of lettuce greens that are all in the same mix. They have lots of different textures and colors, and they're really great to direct sow. So this is a great option as well. Now, the key for all of these that we start from seed directly in the garden, especially if the soil temperature is a little bit high still, is the soil needs consistent soil moisture for germination. Also, be very careful not to sow these seeds any of these seeds really that we're talking about today too deeply because most of these seeds are really small. Lettuce and carrots being prime examples, they're very tiny. So if you bury them too deep, they're not going to have enough energy to sprout and get up to get light. The general rule of thumb is you want to plant about twice as deep as the seed is wide. And if you look at a lettuce seed, you know that that's barely under the soil. I don't really even take the time to bury the seed. I usually just scatter it on top and then just rough up the soil around it. And that's usually perfectly fine. The next fast-growing green that you can plant is spinach. Spinach is a good one to plant this time of year because it needs cooler soil, 75 degrees or less, because the warmer the soil is, the slower the germination is. We talked about that last week. And so a shade cloth can actually help cool off the soil if your soil is still really warm. But the thing about spinach is that if you get them planted now, you can harvest the baby greens pretty quickly. But then if you live in an area where spinach will overwinter, it's always overwintered for me. I'm in 8A, but even zone 7 for sure, unless there's a major cold snap at some point, should be able to overwinter spinach and maybe even zone 6. I'm not quite for sure about that, but it's worth trying. But for me, spinach, I get baby greens in the fall, but then mature greens are going to come in usually February or March after they overwinter. The next fast-growing green is a staple in my garden. You probably heard me wax poetic about this over and over again. That's arugula. I love arugula. It's fast-growing. It germinates in just a few days. Actually, at the time of this recording, I'm recording this on a Tuesday, I planted some arugula seeds in my garden on Saturday morning, and I looked yesterday, Monday night, and they had already sprouted. So that's what, 2 days? They only took 2 days to germinate. So they will germinate pretty quickly in this warm soil. And what I love about arugula is, in my opinion, they are the perfect complement to lettuce because lettuce can be a little bland at times, if we admit it, and arugula just adds a little bit of flavor to that. Another one that can do the same thing would be mustard greens. Mustard greens are a favorite of a lot of people in the fall and winter because you can harvest at different stages for different purposes. Mustard greens can be harvested young, like 4 to 6 inches for baby mustard greens. And like arugula, they do tend to lend some flavor. It's a little bit more of a spicy flavor, even more so than arugula. But then if you let them grow to maturity, and again, many of us who live in warmer climates, they're going to grow throughout the winter. They can get to be mature mustard greens, which you can cut in the middle of the winter many times and then cook them like spinach. Just, like wilt them down and you get a cooked green. So mustard greens can do double duty, and now is a great time to plant them. Next, you have Asian greens, and I love these as well. You may not recognize these because it's a kind of a class all its own, but some examples are tatsoi, bok choy, mizuna. I planted mizuna this year. They can be direct sown very easily, but I ended up getting a head start on the mizuna, and I planted them indoors and then transplanted them. They do really well. So you can direct sow them and they will sprout pretty easily, or you can transplant them if you already have starts. And the benefits with Asian greens is that they are very fast maturing, 30 to 40 days. Again, a month to 6 weeks potentially for you to have these. And they provide such a variety in a salad mix. And many of these, if you let them, again, go to a little bit more maturity, you can actually cook with them as well. So you have a double duty type green. If nothing else in this list appeals to you, these fast-growing greens will be worth your time just to be able to have extra greens for salads and stir fries and soups and anything that you want to use in the winter. Now, there are some other greens that we're going to talk about in a little bit, like kale. But one thing I want you to know before we move on is that the thing is with greens is that in the spring and especially into the summer, these greens can use shade because they don't like hot weather. The long days, the pounding sun is not good for them. They will bolt, they get bitter, they wilt, all of these things. So a best practice, especially in the summer, is to tuck these greens underneath larger crops. And even when we're planting later in the summer, that's still a best practice because it's still so hot. But now that we're moving into September and into the fall, you've already noticed the day length is getting shorter very quickly. I don't know if you've seen this on social media, but I'm just fascinated by the posts where you see a map, and we have these in the US. If you're in another country, maybe you have these as well. But there's a map and it shows, in particular, I noticed in August, and it showed how many minutes of daylight we lose in the month of August. And I think in my area, it was like 50 minutes we lost from August 1st to August 31st. Those of you guys in the north, you lose daylight at a more rapid pace than we do. And that just continues going. So, what that means is that, yes, while greens can benefit from the shade, especially in the heat in the middle of the summer, even greens need more and more sun the further we get into the fall. So, this is one thing that I would recommend that you do. At this point of the year, I am not planting my greens in any kind of shade because I've noticed that when I do, their growth slows tremendously, and I have a hard time getting them to maturity before the winter sets in. So at this time of year, whether you're direct sowing or whether you're transplanting, any of the crops that I'm talking about today, but that includes greens that otherwise can handle some shade, I highly recommend, unless you're in a climate where you're still getting into the 90s right now, I would recommend that you plant them in full sun because it's going to help them grow faster. And if you have a winter coming on, you're going to want them to grow as fast as they can. Okay, so let's move on to root crops. Now we're going to come back to some of those other greens in just a little bit, but they're kind of in a category of their own. So let's move on to some root crops that you can plant right now. Number one is radishes. Radishes are going to be your quickest growing root crop that you can plant. Directly sow these into the ground, again, about double the depth of the width of the seed. And you'll notice that especially in warm soil, they're going to sprout in just a few days. And radishes are going to be ready to harvest in as little as 25 to 30 days, maybe add a little bit just for the waning daylight, but they're going to be very quick growing. You can also sow them every week or two to try to get more of a staggered harvest if you want. Another option is turnips. Turnips really grow better when you're planting the seed in cooler soil. So that's why now is a really great time to plant these. You can directly sow them in the ground. And then depending on the variety, they can be mature between 40 and 60 days. Some of the ones that are more harvestable as smaller turnip roots would be Hakurii. I'm not sure how you actually say that, but they're about 40 days to maturity. And then purple top is about 60 days to maturity, and they're going to get a little bit larger of a root. But turnips also can be harvested for their greens. So even if you're not able to get a full-size bulb, or maybe you just want turnip greens, this is a really great time to be able to plant these in order to get a harvest of turnips or turnip greens in the fall. Next, we have beets. Now, I like to plant my beets in the middle of August because I have not had great luck getting the root to size up well if I plant them this late. But you can still plant them a little bit later, as long as you know that either you're probably going to harvest baby beets, which a lot of people swear by baby beets. They love the smaller ones being more tender and such. Or you can also harvest the greens. Beet greens are very nutritious, and they're a great thing to add to the salads. So even if your roots don't grow fully to size, beet greens are delicious to add to salads. And then you can also, if they mature, you can again cook them down like you do other greens as well. And then finally, we have carrots. Again, I think for me, this is a little late to plant carrots. I think it's possible, but I would definitely lean toward the ones that are faster to maturity, like Napoli. That would be the one that I would recommend, or even some of the smaller baby carrots, like little finger. I think little finger is one. But keep in mind that even if you plant carrots now, you may get smaller carrots, but that's okay. A lot of the smaller ones are actually really tender and sweet, especially if you're eating them fresh. Just understand you may not, depending on where you're located, you may not get huge carrots. Again, keep these in full sun. They absolutely need as much sun as possible. And like your greens, keep the soil consistently moist so that you can ensure that they germinate quickly. Now, one thing that you might want to consider with especially carrots, but any of the directly sown greens, consider the amount of pest pressure you still might have in your garden. I know this year and last year, I've really been struggling with grasshoppers. Even with insect netting covering my brassicas, something is getting in there, and I'm pretty sure it's grasshoppers because I can tell the difference between the grasshopper feeding patterns compared to a worm. I don't think the worms have gotten there. The cabbage moth, I mean, that's been good. But especially with a really small seedling, like a beet seedling or a carrot seedling, I mean, they can be gone in a day and you wouldn't even realize it. And I think that's happened to me more than I realized. I was thinking there's some problem with the germination rate, but then looking at it, I think that they may have been eaten by grasshoppers or even flea beetles. So you might want to consider, even with some of these root crops, you might consider adding a floating row cover, I wouldn't necessarily do a floating row cover this time of year. It would probably make it too hot. I would consider adding that insect netting to protect for some of those late season pests that may just love those baby greens once they sprout. Next, we're going to be talking about brassicas that you can still sow. But before we get there, I just want to remind you that one of my best companions in my fall planting is organic Rev. With fall planting in full swing, whether I'm direct seeding carrots and spinach or whether I'm transplanting broccoli, cabbage, and more recently lettuce, I always make sure that organic Rev is part of my process. For transplants especially, I mix Rev about 50-50 with water, and then I dip the root ball of the plant before planting. Just this weekend, I transplanted lettuce, and that's exactly what I did, making sure that those root balls were covered in that Rev mixture. What this does, especially this time of year, if it's still a little bit warm for you, it helps reduce transplant shock and it encourages faster root growth, which is key when the daylight is already starting to shorten. Anything we can do to make our plants grow faster right now, we want to do it. And also for direct seeded crops, a lot of times our soil is already a little bit tired from the summer crops. It can help to water Rev into the soil an ounce a gallon, either before you sow the seeds or right after, to help these young roots to establish and grow. Rev helps rebuild that microbial life and helps unlock nutrients that might otherwise go unused. And this sets the stage for stronger, more resilient fall crops. So whether you're direct seeding or you're transplanting or both, head to organicrev.com, that's R-E-V, organicrev.com, and use my code Jill10 and you can save 10%. Your fall garden will see a difference and it will thank you with the harvest. At least it has for me. Next, let's look at category number 3, and these are some brassicas that you can transplant now. If you're brand new to gardening, brassicas may be a new term for you, but brassicas are basically the plant family that includes crops like broccoli, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, kale, collard greens, those type of crops. But mostly these brassicas, especially if you're growing them for a larger harvest like a broccoli or a cabbage, it's probably too late for many of us to plant what we want to become a full-size broccoli or cabbage, but there are some workarounds here. With cabbage in particular, I've found that cabbage tends to be a little bit more cold hardy. You can plant transplants and you might want to choose more of your personal sized cabbages. If you look in seed catalogs, which at this point it's probably too late to plant from seed, but maybe keep this in your mind for next year or look at this at your local nursery. You can see that there are some cabbages that are meant to be smaller size. Those are going to have more opportunity to head up. You can also eat baby leaves. Many people like to eat the entire leaf of a brassica plant at some stage. If you're a cook and a chef and want to do that, then that's a great option. Just understand that if you're planting broccoli or cabbage at this time, you may not get full-size heads, but you still may get something. So it may be worth your time. Another option, and I haven't tried this before, but it might be worth looking into. And if you try it, I would love for you to let me know how it works. Or if you've grown it before, let me know. But that is broccoli rabe, but it's also called rapini. This doesn't make a full-size head, but instead they create these tender stems of like a broccoli flavor, and these stems are ready in 40 to 45 days. So this might be an option if you're wanting something broccoli-like, but you just don't have time to get the broccoli heads full size. The next one would be kale. Now you can do transplants of kale or you can direct seed the kale as well. If you direct seed them, they may not get into this full-size kale, depending on how you want it. If you want baby kale for salads, you should be fine either way, either direct seeding or transplants. But if you're wanting a large kale plant to use to cook with, like those big 12 to 18-inch kale plants, you probably want to start with transplants. And then these are actually pretty cold hardy. When I have grown kale before, they've lasted maybe not the entire winter, but well into winter. And the cold improves the flavor of the kale. So this would be a great time to consider planting kale. And then also collard greens. Transplanting gives them a head start. I started some collard greens indoors this year, and then I planted them in my garden, I think at the beginning of September or the end of August. But last year I planted collard greens the second week of September, and they did really well, and they were delicious. I remember harvesting them, I think it was in January. They were ready to harvest in December, but I remember harvesting my last harvest in January and cooking them and eating them. They were so good. You may not think you love greens, and I think sometimes this time of year, like I don't have any craving for cooked greens, but in the middle of the winter, there's something about our bodies that it's like, this is so good. It's fresh. It's when you don't have a whole lot else coming out of your garden in the winter. Collard greens were so good. So if you haven't tried them before, I didn't grow up eating collard greens, even though I think that's kind of a Southern thing, maybe. I don't know. I hear about a lot of people growing collard greens. I didn't try them until I was an adult, and I really like them. So I made sure to have them as part of my fall garden this year. But all that to say, with some of these brassicas, you can direct sow, but you may have better luck if you can find them as transplants from your local garden center. So if you can find them, grab them. Otherwise, then directly sow them, but you may have to harvest them a little bit younger than usual. All right, finally, let's talk about what herbs you can plant right now. Cilantro is great to direct sow. It loves cooler weather. It also doesn't bolt if you plant it later on in the fall. And honestly, depending on your location, mid-September may still be a little early. A lot of times when I see my cilantro that's volunteered from my spring cilantro that goes to seed and then I let the seeds drop, they usually don't start sprouting, I would say, till October. But it might be worth your time to try to direct sow some cilantro now. And then depending on your winter, you could have cilantro leaves most of the winter. It loves the cold weather. Parsley can also be planted now, but choose transplants. If you haven't started them from seed and door already, then see if you can find parsley transplants from your local garden center. It will survive the frost, and depending on your winter, it may even overwinter. It's always overwintered in my area. And then finally, we've got dill. Dill is a fast grower. You can directly sow it directly in the garden. It's fast to mature, and you can even succession plant it if you want to try to get some dill. Think about all that ranch dip that you want to make for your holiday meals. That's what I'm thinking of. Like, I got to get my dill. And I had a whole bunch of dill that I planted in the middle of the summer. And then, like many of you, here come the swallowtail butterfly, not worms, but you know what I mean. I'm losing that word. Anyway, but I couldn't take them off because they're just gorgeous. These butterflies are amazing in the fall, and I just kind of let them chew on the dill. And you know what? I harvested some of my dill, but I let these go, these worms go, and now I have butterflies, and I still have my dill plant. So we were able to share a little bit. All that to say, you can still plant dill if you don't have any in your garden right now, and it would be a great option for your garden. Okay, I want to wrap up with a few reminders here to help you be successful in what you're planting right now. We know that soil temperatures are dropping. Many times what we'll see is as the nighttime temperatures drop, then we start seeing the soil temperatures drop. And that's a great sign because most of these crops, especially when we're direct seeding them, they like the cooler soil temperatures. But also keep on top of moisture. For many of us, this is not the time when we get a lot of rain, although I said that in last week's podcast episode, which I had recorded ahead of time. And I think last week was when we got 6 inches of rain, which is unheard of. It set records for us as far as what kind of rain we get from a non-tropical system here in Arkansas. So you never know what the weather's going to do, all that to say. But if you're not getting consistent rains, make sure to keep the soil moist. I love my Garden in Minutes garden grids for that because I can cycle them on and off, and I can back off when I need to make the irrigation not as heavy as it was in the summer. But keeping them moist, the soil moist for germination is key. And also, like I said before, when you choose where to plant, full sun exposure is critical. Now, I will say, let me kind of go back just for a minute. When I planted my lettuce seeds just a couple days ago on a Saturday, I planted not the seeds, but the transplants. I planted the transplants in my green stalk vertical planter. But as soon as I planted them, I put the green stalk in the shade where it's going to stay for just a few days. I want to make sure that those transplants get established because they are a little bit vulnerable to heat at transplant. But as soon as I can see that they're okay in a few days, I'm moving it out to full sun. And also understand, even if your crops don't completely size up, even the smaller harvests are flavorful, they're rewarding, and they're worth the time that you take to plant them. And then if you have floating row covers or if you have the availability to get them, these floating row covers as we head into the cooler weather are going to help to extend your season so that you can have these harvests for even longer. So even though it's September and even though we are looking at all things fall and winter, don't let the calendar stop you from planting. Planting now will help keep your garden producing, and it helps to keep your kitchen stocked up long after the summer fades. Not only is this rewarding to be able to still be harvesting from your garden as we go into September, October, November, and even December and January for me, and then obviously into February and March for some overwinter crops, that's rewarding, but it also cuts down on your grocery costs because for every side dish and for every salad that you could harvest that you grew yourself, that's money that you save going to the grocery store, money that you can put toward other things that have risen in cost so much. So this is worth it on all accounts. Now, finally, notice that I didn't mention garlic. It's not quite time to plant garlic, but now is a great time to start preparing for planting garlic in October or November. And if you're new to planting garlic and you're not sure where to start, be sure and download my free garlic planting cheat sheet. It will get you started on how to know how to plant garlic and to make sure you get a harvest next summer. I'll have the direct link for that in the show notes. And if you're looking for seed garlic, sometimes this time of year it's hard to find sources online that haven't sold out yet. But at the time of this recording, Wood Prairie Family Farm, they're a partner of mine. They are still taking pre-orders. I just checked this morning. Hopefully by the time this airs, it'll still be the same. And those orders will ship later this month. And even if you don't plant until a month after you get them, store them in a cool place until it's time to plant. And you can use my code Jill5 for 5% off. This is organic seed garlic, and we'll have the link to Wood Prairie as well as that order code so you can get 5% off in the show notes as well. Well, I hope that this episode has been helpful to inspire you on what you can plant even now in the middle of September. And I would love to hear from you if you plant any of these crops. Please let me know. Connect with me at Instagram. You can find me at The Beginner's Garden. I would love to hear from you. Or if you're getting my emails on Fridays, just reply to those emails and let me know how it's going in your garden. I love to hear from you. So either of those places is where you can reach me. Thank you so much for joining. And if you're not subscribed yet, please click subscribe on wherever you're listening to this. So next week's episode comes directly to you. We'll be talking all things fall gardening coming up and other topics that will help you out in your garden as well. I look forward to seeing you next week. I hope you have a great week and I'll chat with you later.